The sweet, heady scent of osmanthus drifted through floor-to-ceiling glass late one early autumn evening, hanging thick over the silent, cavernous living room of the Voss estate. I sat cross-legged atop a cashmere rug, my fingertips brushing the screen of a tablet as I finalized the final down payment on my 17th commercial storefront. A pale blue payment confirmation popped up, the $3 million figure stark and gleaming on the display. A faint, private smile tugged at my lips as I stroked the black metal credit card tucked between my fingers. The secondary card Lucas Voss had tossed at me without a second thought 3 years prior. Every month, he'd merely glance at the towering billing statements with a flicker of annoyance before ordering his assistant to settle the balance, never once pausing to question where the endless streams of money vanished. To anyone watching, this lavish spending spree was funded entirely by Lucas's fortune, but the truth was far different. Every cent traced back to the dowry my grandfather had left me, a modest starting sum I'd multiplied endlessly over 3 years, splitting funds across hidden accounts, storefront deeds, and anonymous stock holdings, until I controlled a sprawling private portfolio all my own. Lucas stood rigid in the entryway, clad a custom charcoal suit stitched by a Parisian tailor. His tie sat perfectly knotted at his throat, yet 2 cuff buttons hung undone, a tiny, unconscious tell he only showed when rage and restlessness gnawed at him from the inside out. His knuckles whitened where he clutched a stack of printed divorce papers, his gaze sliding over me like I was a bothersome piece of furniture he needed hauled off to storage. I knew that cold, dismissive stare all too well. It had been fixed on me the day we'd exchanged forced wedding vows 3 years prior. Not a single smile crossing his face through the entire ceremony. "Sign it, Wynn," he said, his voice sharp and frigid, laced with zero warmth of the 3 years we'd shared under one roof. I pushed myself slowly to my feet, brushing stray lint off a cream-knit sundress before gliding over to take the stack of papers from his grasp. My eyes skimmed the printed settlement clauses, and I nearly laughed out loud at the so-called generous offer laid out before me. A single luxury mansion, $500,000 in liquid cash, and a $20,000 monthly stipend for 3 consecutive years. Just one of my storefronts generated $18,000 in rental income each month on its own. $500,000 amounted to nothing more than pocket change from one of my short-term investment portfolios. Lucas truly believed I was a helpless, frivolous housewife who existed solely to burn through his cash, blind to the empire I'd quietly built right beneath his nose. "You finished reading?" He knit his brows tight, impatience thick in his tone, tapping a finger against the edge of the countertop. "The terms are more than fair. Put your signature down." I tilted my head up to meet his eyes, a faint, mocking amusement glinting in my irises. "Can I borrow a pen?" Lucas froze for a split second, clear shock flickering across his features. He'd spent days crafting the imaginary scene in his head, me sobbing, clinging to his legs, begging him not to leave me behind. He'd never anticipated I'd only ask for writing utensils without a single tear or plea. He fished a matte Mont Blanc fountain pen from his suit breast pocket and handed it over. I bent at the waist, my strokes sharp and unflinching as I scrawled Wynn Hale across the signature line, the motion as calm and businesslike as if I were sealing a multi-million-dollar corporate merger, not ending my 3-year marriage. Once finished, I slid the papers back toward him, tucking the fountain pen neatly into his pocket and smoothing imaginary wrinkles from his tailored lapel. 3 years of our little arrangement come to an end. It's been a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Voss. Colour drained from his cheeks all at once, as if I'd struck him hard across the jaw. His Adam's apple bobbed repeatedly, a flood of unspoken words clogging his throat before he forced them free. "You aren't going to ask why?" I tilted my chin, feigning innocent confusion. Isn't the reason obvious? Sophie's back. The second Sophie Reed's name left my lips. A soft, yearning light bloomed in his eyes. The quiet, smouldering adoration he'd reserved for her for 6 long years. Sophie, his long-lost white moonlight, had fled overseas 3 years ago, leaving Lucas to drink himself into a stupor for an entire night. The very next morning, his grandfather had slammed the merger contract between the Hale and Voss families down on his desk, forcing our loveless union to secure both dynasties. He'd moved into the estate with me, yet slept in his home office every single night, inventing last-minute business trips to avoid me on every wedding anniversary. You don't mind at all? He couldn't wrap his mind around my unruffled composure, disbelief heavy in every syllable. A soft, hollow laugh spilled from my throat, echoing through the vast empty halls of the mansion, shattering the fragile illusion of our sham marriage. Mind that my husband never once loved me? Mind that we've slept in separate rooms for 3 full years? Mind that I've spent every anniversary waiting alone in this giant empty house? Lucas, I would have broken long ago if I'd let resentment eat away at me. His face paled completely, lips trembling without a single retort to offer. I slung a cheap canvas tote bag over one shoulder, the prop I'd carried everywhere to sell, the act of a thoughtless, cash-burning wife, and turned toward the front door, pausing only when I drew level with his frame. Thank you for the care you've given me these past 3 years, truly, I murmured, my tone sweet on the surface, sharp resolve simmering underneath. I owed him everything I'd gained these past seasons. 3 undisturbed years to plan my revenge, an unlimited credit card he never bothered auditing, his complete fixation on Sophie that kept him oblivious to my schemes, and unfettered access to every confidential Voss Group document I needed to compile irrefutable proof of his illegal operations. I'd used every gift he'd accidentally handed me to build the weapon that would dismantle his entire corporate empire the moment I stepped over this threshold. I hauled the heavy oak front door open, crisp autumn wind gusting inward, carrying the faint scent of osmanthus with it and sweeping the suffocating tension from the room behind me. Lucas's rough, hoarse voice called out to my retreating back. Aren't you sad? My footsteps halted on the marble threshold, but I refused to glance over my shoulder, my voice light as a falling flower petal carried on the breeze. Sad? Lucas, do you remember the vow I made to myself the night I married you? Silence stretched out behind me, only the rough huff of his frustrated breath cutting through the quiet. I swore that one day you'd drop to your knees and beg me to stay. The door slammed shut hard behind me the instant I finished speaking, and the sharp crash of shattered porcelain echoed through the estate. He'd smashed the Celadon teacup we'd kept on the entry console, his rage finally boiling over. I didn't spare the house a single backward glance, hurrying toward the underground parking garage and stepping into the elevator. I pulled my phone from the canvas bag, a new text lighting up the screen, sent from a contact labeled Grady Mercer. Congratulations on your freedom. All evidentiary files are fully compiled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. A warm, satisfied grin curved my mouth as I tapped out 2 short words in reply. Received. The mirrored elevator wall reflected my face as the metal doors slid closed. At 25, my features were soft yet striking, warm hazel eyes glittering with quiet triumph, a sly, confident tilt to my lips. Wynn Hale had spent 3 long years hiding behind a mask of complacent docility, but the game only truly began the second I walked away from Lucas Voss's gilded cage. My full name was Wynn Hale, granddaughter of the late CEO of Hale Enterprises, or former CEO now. The former label dated back 3 years, immediately after my grandfather's sudden passing. My maternal uncle, Wynn Hale, had fallen deep into $30 million of gambling debt, the interest compounding endlessly until he'd secretly surrendered 30% of the Hale Group's shares to Lucas at a fraction of their true market worth. The whole dirty deal had been finalized before my grandfather's funeral even concluded, all for a quick infusion of cash to feed Warren's destructive habit. I'd known every sordid detail the day the papers were signed, yet I'd still agreed to marry Lucas, and love had never once factored into my choice. Hidden among my grandfather's personal effects, I'd found a tattered leather notebook filled with 10 years of meticulous notes, tracing every thread connecting Voss Group to offshore money laundering rings operating across 3 continents. My grandfather hadn't died of a sudden heart attack, as the coroner's report claimed. He'd been silenced while digging into Lucas's illegal schemes, his investigation inches away from exposing the entire criminal network before his untimely death. I'd walked down the aisle with a single, unshakable goal: reclaim everything the Voss family had stolen from my bloodline and lay every piece of damning evidence out for the authorities to see, honoring my grandfather's unfinished justice. Sophie's unexpected return had only pulled my timeline forward by 6 months. I'd planned to strike half a year later, but Lucas's impulsive divorce proposal handed me the perfect opening to move my plan ahead of schedule. As I stepped out of the elevator and onto the street in front of the mansion's private driveway, a cream Porsche rolled to a smooth stop at the curb. The passenger door swung open, and Sophie Reed stepped out, her chestnut waves cascading over the shoulders of a cream trench coat. Makeup airbrushed to flawless perfection, her peach lip tint crafted to evoke an innocent, vulnerable aura, the whole world associated with Lucas's beloved white moonlight. I'd seen her photo tucked deep inside Lucas's wallet countless times, the leather lining worn thin from years of constant rubbing against the printed image of her face. Her eyes widened the second she spotted me, tears welling instantly at her lash line as she rushed forward, voice thin and trembling with manufactured guilt. "I'm so sorry, Wynn. I never imagined Lucas would end his marriage over me. I never meant to tear the two of you apart." Her performance was Oscar-worthy, every sob and trembling breath carefully rehearsed to win sympathy, yet all I could feel was quiet amusement watching her put on the show. I lifted a hand, brushing the stray tears off her cheek gently, my touch soft enough to catch her entirely off guard. "Don't cry, your makeup will run everywhere." Sophie froze, stunned by my lack of anger or hysteria, glistening tears still clinging to her eyelashes. "You don't hate me?" "Hate you for stealing a man who never loved me to begin with." I chuckled low, leaning in until my lips hovered beside her ear, my tone barely audible over the rustle of autumn leaves. "Truthfully, I should be thanking you. If you hadn't come back, Lucas never would have pushed for this divorce. Without this separation, I'd never have the chance to take back my grandfather's company. You've done me a huge favor, Sophie." Her pupils blew wide with shock, stepping backward sharply as she processed my hidden meaning. I pulled upright, tossing her a quick, playful wink before spinning on my heel and walking away, the sharp tap of my stiletto heels against asphalt forming a brisk, victorious rhythm behind me. She called out my name in a shaky, panicked voice, but I paid her no mind, continuing forward without pause. A dozen paces later, I heard her fumble for her phone, her voice breaking into sobs as she dialed Lucas's number. "Lucas, Wynn's acting strange. I'm so scared." A faint smirk tugged at my jaw as I kept walking. The classic, scorned white moonlight victim play, utterly predictable. My phone buzzed twice in quick succession inside my tote bag, 2 texts from Lucas popping up on my lock screen. "What did you say to Sophie?" If you lay a single finger on her, I will ruin every asset you own. I tapped the mute button on his entire chat thread without hesitation, switching over to Grady Mercer's contact and sending a soft, warm voice note. Could you send me your apartment address? I'm suddenly craving your homemade pour-over coffee. 3 seconds later, a location pin popped up, paired with a short line of text, cream or black sugar. I typed back fast, both, plus a side of you. Only a single period appeared in reply at first, followed shortly by a string of numbers, entry code 0912. September 12th, the day I'd first sat across from Grady in his downtown office, laying out my pile of evidence and shaking hands to form our secret alliance. He'd remembered the exact date all these years, a quiet detail that sent a soft, warm flutter through my chest. Grady Mercer was Lucas's most feared rival, the only businessman in the entire state capable of matching and outmaneuvering him in every corporate battle they'd waged over 5 years. Voss Group built its fortune on luxury real estate developments, so Grady poured his resources into high-end mixed-use commercial plazas. When Lucas expanded into film production studios, Grady purchased an entire national theatre chain overnight to cut off his distribution routes. When Voss launched a retail startup line, Grady locked down exclusive partnerships with the top 3 live stream shopping platforms before Lucas could even draft a business proposal. Over every negotiation, merger bid, and market takeover, Lucas had lost 8 out of 10 showdowns against Grady's calculated strategy. This sharp, unyielding tycoon had been my silent ally for 3 full years, a partnership I'd carefully orchestrated from scratch, building trust and trading confidential intel month after month until he became the sharpest blade in my arsenal. Within the first month of moving into Lucas's mansion, I'd unraveled the full extent of his criminal operation, led by his closest confidant and chief financial advisor, Martin Shaw. Taking down Lucas single-handedly was impossible. I needed an ally with equal financial power and a personal vendetta against Voss Group, and Grady fit every requirement perfectly. He possessed unlimited capital and an extensive network of industry connections, yet lacked the concrete proof required to take Lucas down permanently. I held every piece of evidence he needed: complete money laundering transfer logs, records of 2 separate predatory business schemes that had driven rival CEOs to bankruptcy and despair. One of those ruined entrepreneurs had been Grady's college roommate, who jumped from his office rooftop after Lucas sabotaged his company's funding, leaving a 7-year-old daughter named Leela behind. I'd spread every folder of documentation across Grady's desk the day we first met, and he'd sat silent for 3 full minutes, staring at the proof of Lucas's cruelty before lifting his gaze to lock eyes with mine. Do you understand the risk you're taking here, Wynn? If Lucas uncovers what we're planning, you'll lose everything you've built. I understand every danger, I'd told him, my voice steady and unshaken. But I have no other choice. He stole my family's legacy and killed my grandfather. I intend to take every last piece back from him. He'd extended a warm, dry palm toward me then, a quiet agreement etched across his features. Then we're partners. Our handshake sealed 3 years of coordinated plotting. Using Lucas's unlimited secondary card as a blind cover, we split large sums of money into 17 anonymous offshore accounts, slowly purchasing 17.3% of Voss Group's outstanding stock shares. The Voss CFO, famous for his supposed financial genius, never caught wind of our quiet acquisition spree. We'd quietly persuaded 3 mid-level finance managers inside Voss to defect and hand over Martin's private offshore bank statements, and coordinated 37 major news outlets to release simultaneous exposes the moment our plan reached its climax. The second I signed those divorce papers and stepped outside the mansion gates, our 3-year master plan officially activated. 30 minutes later, I stood outside Grady's high-rise apartment, punching 0912 into the keypad lock. The front door swung inward, warm amber lighting spilling out to wrap around me, the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filling the air and washing away 3 years of hidden stress. Grady wore a plain black cotton crewneck tee, sleeves rolled up to his elbows to reveal defined forearms as he poured steamed milk into 2 ceramic mugs. He barely glanced up when he heard me walk through the doorway, nodding toward the entry closet. "Second shelf in the shoe rack. Those slippers are for you." I glanced down, spotting a pair of fluffy pink plush slippers tucked away, a tiny gesture he'd remembered after I'd casually complained his guest footwear felt stiff on my feet weeks prior. A gentle warmth bloomed deep in my chest as I slipped them on, sinking deep into his oversized leather sofa and letting out a long, relieved sigh. Lucas' divorce settlement only offered $500,000 as compensation, I told him, tilting my head back to meet his eyes as he carried both mugs over to the seating area. Grady sat down across from me, taking a slow sip of coffee, his tone dry and faintly amused. He has no idea what kind of woman he married all these years. He's convinced I'm nothing more than a mindless shopper who burns his cash on designer bags and dresses. He's blind to everything worth seeing, Grady replied, setting his mug down on a marble side table and fixing his full attention on me, warm admiration softening his usually stern business features. "You're the sharpest, most resilient person I've ever met, Wynn." His sincere compliment sent heat rushing to the tips of my ears. I ducked my head and took a large gulp of coffee to hide my flustered expression, wincing as the hot liquid scalded my tongue. "Slow down," Grady chided softly, concern flickering across his brow. "Don't burn your throat." "I'm fine," I mumbled, avoiding his amused gaze. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, revealing a shallow dimple on his right cheek, a tiny feature hidden behind his usual cold corporate demeanor that only emerged when he let himself relax around me. 9 a.m., tomorrow's the emergency Voss board meeting, he said, shifting back to business, his expression sharpening once more. "All legal filings and stock documentation are prepped. Are you fully ready?" "Every last detail is set in place." "Don't waste a single thought on Sophie Reed," he added, a faint flicker of tension in his tone I barely caught. I laughed lightly, shaking my head. I've never once considered her a genuine threat to anything I'm building. He studied me for a long beat, the unspoken weight of something lingering behind his dark eyes, before he simply nodded once, the room falling into quiet stillness as wind tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I twisted my fingers around my ceramic mug, the question I'd buried deep inside for 3 years bubbling to the surface before I could hold it back. "Once all of this is over, what am I to you, Grady? Just a business partner?" His fingers tightened slightly around his own mug, gaze locking onto mine, his voice calm and deliberate as he answered, "You will always be my most vital partner." Those 2 words settled heavy in my chest, a quiet ache blooming behind my ribs. I stared down at my blurred reflection floating in the dark coffee liquid, forcing a thin, hollow smile onto my face. "Wynn," I reminded myself firmly. "Stay focused on justice for Grandpa. Don't indulge fleeting, foolish feelings before the battle is even won." The next morning arrived fast, the clock reading 8:50 as I stepped into Voss Group's top-floor boardroom. The space stretched wide, with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the entire downtown skyline, tension thick enough to grab hold of every executive and shareholder seated around the massive oval conference table. Martin Shaw sat glowering on one side, Lucas's most devious schemer, his face lined with greedy calculation. Lucas occupied the head chair, his features storm-dark, the entire industry buzzing about our sudden split. Every man in the room waited with bated breath to watch how the scandal would tank Voss's market value. Lucas cleared his throat, tapping a pen harshly against the tabletop to capture the room's attention. Regarding my recent separation from Wynn, "Sorry, I'm running a touch late." My clear, unwavering voice cut him off mid-sentence, every head snapping toward the boardroom doors. I stepped forward in a sharp black tailored blazer over a silk ivory blouse, my long dark hair twisted into a low, sleek bun that exposed the delicate curve of my neck. My makeup was bold and intentional today, sharp arched brows and deep red matte lipstick, replacing the faint neutral tones I'd worn around Lucas for 3 years, every line of my frame radiating unapologetic power. Lucas shot to his feet instantly, brows drawn tight in rage and confusion. "This is a closed internal board meeting. You have no authorization to be here. Leave at once." "No authorization?" I let a cool, mocking laugh escape me, gliding forward and sliding a thick stack of legal paperwork across the polished mahogany table towards him. "Take a look at these documents first, Lucas." His face drained of all color the second he scanned the top page. 17 separate stock proxy agreements, each anonymous investor signing over all voting rights to my name, combining for a 17.3% total share of Voss Group's public stock. "This is impossible," he stammered, hands shaking as he flipped page after page, tracking the 3-year timeline of hidden purchases. Our risk management team would have flagged stock acquisition activity this large. "They never looked hard enough," I replied, sinking into an empty chair and crossing my legs at the ankle, utterly at ease amid the chaos I'd sparked. "Every cent used to purchase those shares ran through that secondary credit card you handed me. You skimmed the monthly statements for 5 seconds each month, assuming all the withdrawals paid for luxury clothing and jewelry, never suspecting I was buying pieces of your own empire right under your nose. From this moment forward, I speak on behalf of 17.3% of all outstanding company stock," I announced, lifting my chin high as every gaze in the room locked onto me. Per Voss Group corporate bylaws, any shareholder holding more than 15% equity reserves the right to call an emergency general vote to restructure the board. I formally motion to remove Lucas Voss from his position as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. Chaos erupted around the table, shareholders muttering and murmuring to one another in stunned shock. Martin shot upright, slamming his palm hard against the wood surface, his face flushed bright red with fury. "You're a civilian with no corporate standing. This is absurd." "I have this to prove my standing," I said, dropping a sealed manila folder onto the table with a heavy thud. Inside rested official federal regulatory complaint receipts, complete diagrams tracing every offshore money laundering pipeline, and full bank records from Martin's multi-million-dollar Cayman Islands hidden accounts. "We can discuss my right to sit here, or we can discuss how many decades the two of you will spend in federal prison." Martin's legs buckled beneath him, sinking back into his leather chair, all color draining from his skin as he shot a panicked, desperate glance toward Lucas for rescue. Lucas's expression was far worse, a mixture of rage, panic, and raw disbelief, twisting his features tight. "Wynn," he hissed, lowering his voice to a volume only the two of us could hear. "Do you realize what you're destroying here? Thousands of ordinary people rely on this company for their livelihoods. How can you live with yourself?" I let out a bitter, hollow chuckle, staring straight into his eyes without a shred of remorse. "Don't pretend you care about working families now, Lucas. Every dollar you laundered came from small business owners you drove to bankruptcy, men who took their own lives because of your predatory tactics. Do you remember Grady's college roommate? He left a 7-year-old little girl without a father, all because your corporate sabotage crushed his startup. Where was your conscience then? I've submitted every shred of evidence to federal financial crimes and fraud task forces, I told him, tapping the regulatory receipt on the table. Their agents are in the lobby building right now. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed down the hallway outside the doors the instant I finished speaking. 4 federal financial crime agents pushed the boardroom doors open, badges clipped to their uniform jackets. Lucas Voss, Martin Shaw, we hold substantial evidence charging you with organized money laundering and felony corporate fraud. You're required to come with us for formal questioning. Martin collapsed fully against his chair, utterly defeated, while Lucas stood rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the table edge. He ignored the officers entirely, his gaze glued firmly to my face, voice raw and broken. Did you marry me solely to avenge your grandfather? Was there ever a single genuine feeling you held for me? There was no answer I owed him. 2 uniformed agents stepped forward to escort him out, and he twisted around to stare at me over his shoulder the entire walk down the hallway, his eyes bloodshot, mouth moving silently, as if begging for a response he'd never receive. The boardroom sank into dead silence once they were gone, every executive too terrified to utter a single word. A soft, steady voice sounded from behind my shoulder, warm and grounding amid the chaos. Are you all right? I inhaled a deep, cleansing breath and turned to face Grady, a genuine, light smile tugging at my lips. I've never felt better. He lifted my leather tote bag off the empty chair beside me, tilting his head toward the exit. Let me treat you to lunch to celebrate. I want the most expensive omakase sushi spot in the city. Anything you'd like is yours. We stepped out into crisp autumn sunlight side by side, and I paused mid-walk to glance up at him. Thank you for everything, Grady. He turned to face me, sunlight gilding the sharp lines of his jaw, his dark eyes holding my reflection clear as day. No need to thank me. I told you, you're my most important partner. Again, that word, partner. I bowed my head with a faint, quiet smile, shoving the soft, unspoken longing in my heart back down where it belonged, buried beneath the weight of unfinished business. Within 30 minutes, every major social media platform erupted with viral headlines. Lucas Voss arrested en masse, money laundering charges. Who is Wynn Hale, the woman who took down Voss Group? Voss, corporate fraud exposed, losses estimated at $2 billion USD. Grady Mercer and Wynn Hale alleged alliance. The Voss downfall, the ultimate revenge story. The top trending post amassed 3 million shares in under an hour, a security camera clip from the Voss mansion driveway circulating endlessly across every social feed. The footage captured the afternoon I'd walked out on Lucas, a simple white sundress slung over my frame, cheap canvas tote bag hanging from one arm, my back straight and unhesitating as I left him behind without a single backward glance. Thousands of commenters labeled me the ultimate revenge heroine, celebrating my quiet victory over Lucas's misplaced devotion to Sophie. Sophie's perfect white moonlight persona crumbled instantly as online sleuths dug up her hidden past. She'd never left the country for elite overseas schooling, as she'd lied to Lucas. She'd fled the US to escape retaliation after crossing a wealthy heir years prior. Her 3 years abroad were spent relying on multiple wealthy men to fund her lavish lifestyle, and she'd returned stateside solely because her visa expired, carrying $30,000 in unpaid credit card debt she'd hoped Lucas would settle for her. Once the full truth hit the web, comment sections filled with mocking jabs at Lucas's terrible judgment. Lucas tossed a self-made business tycoon for a woman drowning in credit card debt. The white moonlight filter shattered completely once everyone saw the truth about Sophie. Wynn outplayed him at every turn, used his own money to buy his stock, teamed up with his rival, and destroyed his entire empire in one day. The second news of Lucas's arrest hit the airwaves. Sophie packed her bags and booked the earliest one-way flight to Southeast Asia, cutting off all contact with Lucas's legal team without a single message. A mutual overseas acquaintance later sent me photos of her working a minimum wage shift at a dive bar in Bangkok, her designer wardrobe long sold off to pay mounting loan interest. She'd created a secret social media account months later to send me desperate, pleading messages begging for cash, claiming she'd only acted out of confusion back then. I deleted and blocked the account without a second thought. Every hardship she endured was a direct consequence of her own greedy choices. Back in county lockup, Lucas learned of her abrupt disappearance and spent 3 minutes sitting silent before throwing every plastic tray and paper cup in his cell against the cinder block walls, finally realizing the woman he'd worshipped for 6 years had never cared about him beyond his bank account. A full month after Lucas's arrest, the preliminary criminal investigation wrapped up. I retained my 17.3% stock ownership and secured a majority stake in Voss Group with Grady's financial backing, stepping into the CEO chair as the new head of the merged corporate body. My very first executive order was to carve out all original Hale Group assets absorbed by Lucas's fraudulent takeover and officially rebrand the division, Hale Enterprises, once more. The grand reopening ceremony for my grandfather's restored company wrapped late one afternoon, and I slipped into a private restroom after the board celebration to let silent tears fall for a handful of seconds, releasing 3 years of buried grief and tension before dabbing my eyes and reapplying lipstick to return to the conference hall. Grady waited for me in the hallway outside the restroom, a folded, dark grey linen handkerchief clutched in his palm, the faint, warm scent of cedar cologne clinging to the fabric. I took it from him, feigning indifference. I didn't cry. Dust just got in my eyes. Of course it was dust, he agreed softly. No trace of mockery in his tone, only quiet compassion. I glanced up at him, a faint, sheepish smile tugging my mouth. You must think I'm ridiculous for breaking down like that. Strength doesn't mean you can never grieve, Grady said firmly, his tone sincere. You're the bravest person I know, and brave people are allowed to cry without shame. My throat tightened with quiet gratitude. For 3 long years, I'd carried every burden alone, never once allowing myself to show weakness in front of anyone. Yet Grady saw every hidden layer of exhaustion beneath my poised exterior. Don't tell anyone I cried today. My lips are sealed, he promised, that faint, sweet dimple surfacing again on his cheek. Over those weeks of corporate restructuring, we worked side by side daily, eliminating every corrupt manager Martin had placed in executive roles, shutting down all illegal offshore shell companies, and greenlighting the affordable, low-income housing projects my grandfather had drafted before his death. Public approval ratings for Hale Enterprises skyrocketed as local news covered our community-focused development plans. Meanwhile, locked away in holding, Lucas tore open an envelope handed to him by his court-appointed lawyer, expecting a heartfelt letter from Sophie. Instead, he found a single line written in my neat, steady handwriting. Thank you for safeguarding Hale Enterprises for 3 years. I've reclaimed what belongs to my family. He crumpled the note in his fist, then smoothed it out again and again, pressing the thin paper to his chest as silent tears streaked down his cheeks. 3 months later, the criminal trial commenced, Lucas spending millions on top defense attorneys to shift every ounce of blame onto Martin. Martin retaliated by testifying against him in full graphic detail, laying out every order Lucas had given to orchestrate the money laundering ring and predatory business fraud schemes. The judge handed down the final sentencing verdict shortly after both men finished testifying. Lucas received 8 years in federal prison, Martin 15 years, for his deeper level of participation in the criminal network. When the verdict popped up on my work laptop mid-project meeting, I scanned the headline once before lifting my gaze to address the board members seated around me, my hands trembling faintly beneath the conference table. Every ounce of justice I'd spent 3 years fighting for had finally arrived. 3 months following the sentencing, a brutal thunderstorm rolled through the city, heavy rain slamming against apartment windows as I curled up on Grady's sofa, picking at a bowl of tomato egg noodles he'd cooked for me. "You put way too much sugar in this broth," I complained playfully, poking at the noodles with a wooden chopstick. "You said the last batch was too tart," he replied from the kitchen counter, wiping a ceramic bowl dry with a linen towel. "That doesn't mean dump half the sugar canister in here." Our light bickering was cut short when an unfamiliar landline number flashed across my phone screen. I answered the call, and Lucas's rough, worn voice filtered through the speaker, instantly recognizable despite the years of distance between us. "Wynn. Prison communications are strictly regulated," I frowned into the receiver. "How did you gain phone access?" "I submitted a special emergency request for a 10-minute call," he said, his tone thick with unfiltered regret. "I just need to say one thing to you. I'm sorry. For 6 years, I chased an illusion with Sophie, blind to everything you sacrificed beside me. When everything fell apart, she ran without a second glance, and you stood your ground and faced me head-on. I need to see you in person, to apologize face to face. Please come visit me." I held the phone away from my ear and set it face down on the coffee table, turning toward Grady, where he'd wandered into the living room, carrying a mug of warm ginger tea. That was Lucas. He's begging for a prison visit to apologize. Grady's grip tightened subtly around the ceramic mug, a faint flicker of unease crossing his features as he spoke. "Do you plan to go?" I lifted my gaze to meet his dark eyes, the question weighing on my heart for years finally spilling out unfiltered. "Grady, you keep calling me your partner. Is that all I'll ever be to you?" He froze for a beat, lightning illuminating the storm-dark windows behind him as silence stretched between us. "Are you certain you want to ask this now?" "I'm completely sure." 3 heartbeats of quiet passed before he set the mug down on the coffee table, stepping over to the sofa and leaning one palm flat against the back cushion beside my head, his other hand rising to cup my jaw gently. He lowered his head and pressed a soft, tender kiss to my lips, the faint cedar scent of his cologne lingering on his skin. My mind went completely blank for several long seconds, every thought of corporate battles and old grudges vanishing entirely as heat flooded my cheeks and the tips of my ears. "Grady, what?" I stammered once he pulled back an inch, our foreheads resting lightly together. "I've loved you since the day you walked into my office with that stack of criminal evidence 3 years ago," he murmured, his voice low and soft against my skin. "You wore a lopsided floral sundress and a crooked ponytail, looking like a recent college grad, yet you spoke about corporate corruption with more fire and clarity than any CEO twice your age. I waited 3 full years for you to finish your fight, to fully step free from that toxic marriage, before I let myself say this out loud. I can't wait any longer to keep this to myself. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, all the loneliness and exhaustion of those 3 hidden years crashing over me in a single wave. I was so alone through all of this, Grady. There were so many nights I thought I couldn't keep going. "You'll never be alone again," he whispered, pulling me tight against his chest, his chin resting lightly atop my hair as I let my silent tears soak his t-shirt. The phone on the coffee table buzzed repeatedly, Lucas's incoming calls lighting up the screen, but I flipped the device fully over, ignoring it entirely. "He's still calling," Grady noted, glancing down at the flashing screen. "Do you want to answer?" "I've got far more important things to focus on," I smiled against his chest, lifting my head to shoot him a playful, teasing look. "I'm trying to pick tomorrow's viral headline. Either Hale Enterprises CEO confirms romance with rival tycoon Grady Mercer, or Lucas Voss's ex-wife marries his greatest corporate enemy." Grady laughed softly, brushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear before pressing a light kiss to my forehead. "I have a better headline for you." He reached into his sweatpants pocket and pulled out a velvet jewelry box, flipping the lid open to reveal a minimalist platinum diamond band, tiny engraved lettering etched along the inner band. "To my only light. Marry me, Wynn." I stared at the ring through blurry, tear-filled eyes, laughing and crying all at once. "That's it? No elaborate proposal speech?" "I bought this ring 3 years ago, the very first day you smiled at me during our partnership meeting." I extended my left hand without hesitation, letting him slide the band onto my ring finger, my voice thick with emotion as I spoke. "Yes, I'll marry you." The following day, a single photo post hit every social media feed. Our intertwined hands displaying matching wedding bands, my caption short and uncomplicated. "White moonlight is just a faded memory. He's my forever." The internet exploded with endless celebratory comments, every online forum buzzing about Lucas's devastating loss. Back in his prison cell, Lucas scrolled the viral post on a shared inmate tablet for 10 straight minutes before requesting a formal appointment with the prison counselor, quiet, broken laughter echoing off the cell walls as he fully absorbed the permanent loss of the one woman he'd never once appreciated. We chose an intimate beach wedding with zero media coverage, only close family and trusted staff invited to the ceremony. Grady handled every minor planning detail, from floral arrangements to custom wedding favors, only letting me choose my bridal gown. During my dress fitting, he lingered at the back of the boutique, his gaze soft and unwavering every time I stepped out in a new design, showering every silhouette with genuine compliments. The boutique manager pulled me aside to mention she'd never seen a high-powered CEO treat a partner with such unreserved tenderness. While finalizing venue paperwork one afternoon, I crossed paths with Wynn Hale inside a downtown shopping mall. He approached me begging for financial support, tears streaming down his face as he apologized for selling our family company to fuel his gambling addiction. I stepped back gently, my tone calm and unyielding. "Grandfather gave you every chance to turn your life around, and you threw it all away for gambling debts. I won't give you another cent, and I'm not filing criminal charges only out of respect for Grandpa's memory." I turned and walked away, leaving him sobbing on the mall walkway without a second glance. A formal prison visitation request arrived via certified mail a few days later, Lucas offering to sign over his last remaining private residential property if I'd agree to one short meeting. I handed the paperwork to Grady without hesitation, who offered to handle the rejection either way I preferred. I fed the entire request envelope through a paper shredder. We finished our business the day I signed those divorce papers. I don't want anything he owns, and I have no desire to see him again. Grady instructed his legal team to send a formal denial letter to the prison, and Lucas sat staring at the typed rejection slip for hours that night, untouched cafeteria food growing cold beside his bunk. 3 months later, our beach wedding unfolded beside soft blue ocean waves, white wildflowers lining the ceremony aisle, warm golden sunlight spilling over the water's surface as I walked arm in arm with Grady down the sand. "Are you nervous?" I whispered as we waited for the officiant to begin. "Not at all," he replied, though I could feel the faint sweat dampening his palm where it clasped mine. "Your hands are sweaty. Don't lie to me." "The ocean breeze is just warm," he argued, making me giggle quietly. The moment the officiant finished the opening prayer, Grady cut him off mid-sentence to shout his answer loud and clear. "I do." I teared up at the raw sincerity in his voice as we exchanged vows. Midway through the reception, an unsigned envelope was delivered to our beachside resort suite, containing a single faded photograph of teenage Lucas standing outside his old university campus, young and arrogant, with a cocky grin. A shaky, smudged handwritten note covered the back of the print. "Happy wedding. I'm sorry, and thank you. Goodbye." I tucked the photo into a small fabric keepsake box before linking arms with Grady to rejoin our guests at the banquet tables. Once we settled into our shared home post-wedding, Hale Enterprises and Grady's corporate holdings finalized a full strategic merger, expanding into renewable energy and coastal tourism development, the combined company's market value doubling within 6 months. No longer needed to navigate corporate battles alone, Grady stayed up late with me to work through complicated merger contracts, and whenever stress overwhelmed me, he'd pack a weekend road trip to quiet coastal towns to clear my head. When financial journalists requested feature interviews, I spoke candidly about my 3 years of hidden plotting, emphasizing that my motivation had never been blind vengeance, only a desire to restore justice for my grandfather and all victims of Lucas's illegal schemes. True wealth means lifting up vulnerable communities, not crushing them for profit, I told reporters, glancing over at Grady beside me as I smiled softly. We stand together through every high and low. 1 year following our wedding, a prison administrator called my private line to inform me Lucas had suffered a severe gastric infection while incarcerated, repeatedly requesting a single final visitation session to deliver a personal apology. Grady noticed the conflict flickering across my face and offered to accompany me to the facility to close the chapter once and for all. I agreed after a night of quiet reflection, and we arrived at the visitation room the next afternoon, a thick sheet of bulletproof glass separating us from Lucas. He'd wasted away drastically over the past year, streaks of grey threading through his dark hair, all his old pride and arrogance stripped away to leave only weary, hollow exhaustion in his eyes. "I'm glad you came," he rasped, pressing both palms flat against the glass divider separating us. "I'm here to put every old conflict to rest once and for all," I told him evenly, no lingering rage in my heart anymore. Lucas let out a bitter, shaky laugh, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I spent every day locked up, replaying all the years I wasted. I chased a hollow fantasy with Sophie and ignored the quiet, brilliant woman standing right in front of me. The second trouble hit, she vanished without a trace, while you had the courage to stand against me face to face." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "I've got a small cash savings left from my pre-prison personal accounts. I want you to pass it to Leela Carter, the daughter of the businessman I ruined all those years ago. It's my only chance to make partial amends." He glanced past me toward Grady, a flicker of genuine remorse in his gaze. "Grady's a good man who deserves you. I spent years fighting him for no reason other than my own ego. "I'll deliver the money to Leela's guardians," I confirmed. "I don't hate you anymore, but I can never fully forgive the harm you caused my family and countless innocent people." The visitation timer buzzed loud to signal our time was up, and Lucas's final quiet words drifted across the glass barrier as guards guided him away. "I hope you live a lifetime of peace and joy." Grady laced his fingers through mine as we stepped outside the prison gates, the sunset painting soft pink streaks across the sky. "Everything's fully behind us now," I nodded, breathing deep the fresh open air, every weight I'd carried for 3 years lifting entirely from my shoulders. 2 years after that final prison visit, I discovered I was pregnant with our son, Jude Mercer. We delegated most day-to-day corporate operations to trusted executive deputies, carving out endless free time for quiet family moments. I personally delivered Lucas's donated funds to Leela, who'd since enrolled in a prestigious middle school. We set up a permanent annual scholarship fund covering all her tuition and living expenses, inviting her to our home every holiday break to spend time with our family. Grady grew incredibly fond of the quiet, resilient young girl, frequently taking her to local libraries and amusement parks on weekends. Around the same time, a foreign trade associate sent me candid photos of Sophie working a night shift at a rundown street food stall in Bangkok, thin and haggard, drowning in unpayable small loan debts after fleeing her creditors. My overseas friend suggested we send her financial aid, but I declined without hesitation. Every hardship she endured stemmed from her own greedy choices to manipulate a married man for wealth, and I had no obligation to intervene in the life she'd built for herself. Grady wrapped an arm around my waist as I set the phone aside, pressing a soft kiss to the crown of my head. From now on, we only focus on our little family and our charity work. Prison updates trickled in occasionally over those months, noting Lucas had thrown himself into rehabilitation programs, attending free legal education classes daily, and writing pages of reflective journal entries to process his past mistakes, earning 2 years off his original 8-year sentence for exemplary conduct. He never sent another letter or filed another visitation request after our single face-to-face meeting, choosing to spend the remainder of his reduced sentence in quiet, uncomplaining self-reflection. When winter rolled around, I gave birth to Jude at a private luxury maternity hospital. Grady stayed awake the entire night, waiting outside the delivery suite, tears filling his eyes the moment the nurses handed our newborn boy into his arms, his large, steady hands moving with awkward, gentle care as he held our son close. We renovated grandfather's old country estate that same winter, planting asmanthus trees across the backyard, matching the ones from the Voss mansion, where I'd once been trapped in a loveless marriage. Every weekend, the whole family gathered there for home-cooked dinners, the sweet floral scent wrapping around us as we shared stories around the dining table. 6 months after Jude's birth, Grady and I formally merged our 2 conglomerates under the new Hale Merger Group banner, completely scrapping every corrupt business practice Lucas had established, shifting the company's core mission to affordable housing development and nationwide charitable outreach programs. We created a permanent non-profit foundation focused on supporting failed small business owners and underprivileged rural students, local media running dozens of positive feature stories, highlighting our charity initiatives. Reporters interviewing me for a yearly finance summit asked to revisit the story of my 3-year revenge plot, and I held Jude securely against my chest as I spoke to them calmly. I never set out to destroy another person's life. My only goal was to restore fairness for my grandfather and everyone hurt by illegal corporate exploitation. Once you hold real power, your greatest purpose is to light the way for people trapped in hopeless circumstances, not dwell on old grudges. The documentary interview, aired on national television, and Lucas watched it alongside other inmates during the facility's weekly media hour, lowering his head in quiet shame as he watched my peaceful, prosperous family life play out across the screen, scribbling a single line into his prison journal. I lost my light and handed her to someone worthy of all the joy I threw away. 6 years after Lucas's sentencing date arrived, marking the end of his reduced incarceration term. No friends, business associates, or family members waited for him outside the prison gates upon his release. Sophie was still wandering foreign cities without stable housing, and every former colleague had cut all ties years prior. He relied on a fellow inmate's referral to secure back-breaking labor at a construction yard on the outskirts of town, hauling heavy building materials for minimum hourly wages. One warm autumn afternoon, we drove out to a rural community charity shelter to drop off boxes of winter coats and school supplies. Jude seated safely in the back of our SUV alongside Leela, who'd come to volunteer with us that weekend. Lucas was carrying lumber past the shelter entrance as our vehicle pulled into the parking lot, spotting our family group instantly. He froze mid-step, standing motionless across the asphalt for several minutes, observing Grady's protective stance beside me. Jude, laughing as Leela showed him a stack of children's storybooks. He never crossed the street to approach us, only dipping his head in a quiet, distant gesture of farewell before turning and walking back toward the construction site. I pulled Jude a little closer to my side, Grady's arm tightening around my waist in silent comfort, neither of us making any move to cross the road and engage with him. It was the final time our paths would ever cross. 5 more years slipped by after that roadside encounter. Jude, entering elementary school, bright and compassionate, regularly joining our volunteer trips to rural aid stations. Leela graduated from a top-tier university with a master's degree in social work, rejecting high-paying corporate job offers to run our foundation's rural support division, traveling remote counties year-round to assist neglected children and struggling local entrepreneurs. Every holiday she returned to our home to share updates on her outreach projects, the trauma of losing her father long, softened by the steady support we'd provided her over the years. I stepped back from day-to-day corporate management alongside Grady, retaining only oversight of major long-term investment decisions, devoting most of our spare time to cross-country road trips and tending the osmanthus grove at grandfather's estate. Sorting storage boxes one quiet afternoon, I uncovered the faded photograph of young Lucas I'd kept all those years, tucking it deep inside a cedar memory chest without a single surge of old emotion. Grady wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, watching me gaze out at the blooming osmanthus trees in the yard. "Do you ever think about everything that happened back then?" I leaned my head back against his chest, a soft smile tugging at my lips. "If I hadn't suffered all those hard years, I never would have met you." "I don't thank the pain," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "But I'm endlessly grateful. Every twist of fate led me to you." Lucas spent his post-prison years working construction labor before relocating to a remote rural valley to manage a small fruit orchard alongside his former cellmate, growing apples and sea buckthorn berries to sell at local county markets, living in a tiny 2-room cottage with no luxury possessions to his name. Sophie remained adrift, drifting between cheap temporary lodging and minimum wage service jobs, still clinging to hollow memories of her short time living off Lucas's wealth, unable to build a stable, honest life for herself. I'd escaped the gilded cage of my loveless marriage, forged a thriving ethical business empire, built a loving family with Grady, and dedicated our wealth to lifting up vulnerable communities. Hate and regret faded with the passing of years. No lingering resentment lingered in my heart, only quiet gratitude for the peace I'd finally earned after years of hidden struggle. 2 years after Lucas relocated to the rural Fruit Valley, a plain paper envelope with no return address arrived at the Foundation's downtown office one autumn morning. I opened it with Grady seated beside me beneath the osmanthus trees in our backyard, pulling out a single handwritten letter and a faded Polaroid snapshot of Lucas standing amid endless apple trees, wearing threadbare canvas work overalls, his hair fully grey, the harsh valley sun carving deep lines into his cheeks. The handwritten note explained he ran a small community fruit program, supplying free produce to rural youth shelters, offering to ship full crates of his harvest to our foundation's dining halls with zero markup, purely as quiet reparation for his past crimes. Grady glanced over the letter before turning to me. "Should we coordinate a purchasing contract with his orchard?" I nodded, instructing the Foundation's procurement team to pay full market rate for all fruit shipments, declining any discounted offers to keep our aid program fully professional, no personal favors extended either way. A few weeks later, a full refrigerated delivery truck arrived at our Foundation warehouse, stacked with boxes of Sweet Valley apples, a handwritten short note tucked inside one crate wishing Jude every success in his volunteer work with rural children. Jude bit into one crisp apple after school that afternoon, marveling at the sweet flavor, and I simply told him the fruit came from a hard-working farmer out west, choosing never to burden him with the messy history between Lucas and our family. That same winter, I traveled down to a southern mountain town for a non-profit leadership forum, chatting with a local village aid coordinator during a lunch break who mentioned a woman named Sophie surviving on odd shifts, washing restaurant dishes and sorting construction waste, constantly lamenting her lost chance at a wealthy life instead of committing to steady, humble labor. I listened without comment, glancing across the town's busy sidewalk to spot a gaunt, haggard woman rummaging through trash bins for recyclable plastic bottles, undoubtedly Sophie, though I turned my gaze away immediately, gripping Grady's hand and walking past without stopping. Her life was the natural consequence of every selfish choice she'd made years prior, and I felt neither pity nor malice toward her anymore. When Jude reached university age, he enrolled in elite business administration courses, shocking all our board members by skipping high-paying corporate internships to sign up for a 6-month rural agricultural volunteer program in Lucas's Valley Orchard region. He drafted a complete digital marketing business plan designed to help local fruit farmers build online live-stream sales channels, listing Lucas's orchard as one primary partner he intended to collaborate with. Before departing for the countryside, he sat down to talk through his project with Grady and me. The orchard owner grows fantastic fruit, but doesn't have any online marketing experience. I want to help him expand his customer base and feed more kids through our shelter program. We only reminded him to prioritize his personal safety, offering full financial support for his volunteer efforts. Over those 6 months, Jude sent regular video updates home, clips showing Lucas quietly assisting with fruit packing and organizing a tiny free library in an unused orchard, shed filled with donated storybooks for local village children. When Jude called me one evening to talk through his marketing strategy, he mentioned Lucas had shared decades of corporate business insight to refine his small farm sales plans, never asking about our family's complicated history. Grady wrapped an arm around my shoulders as I watched the video feed, a soft smile on my face. "The cycle of bitterness ends with our generation," he said quietly. "All Jude sees is someone doing good for kids, no old grudges attached." The following spring, we fully renovated grandfather's old country estate, carefully preserving his original oak desk and leather-bound investigative notebooks inside the home study. While sorting decades of stored documents in the attic, Jude stumbled across the old merger contracts and evidence files I'd compiled to take down Voss Group years prior, asking me what the paperwork contained. I sat him down in the study armchair and told him the full, unembellished story of grandfather's wrongful death and Lucas's corporate crimes, explaining my 3 years of hidden plotting without a trace of lingering hatred in my voice. Recovering our family's assets only fixed half the damage, I told him gently. Real healing comes from using what you've gained to care for people who have nothing. Jude nodded thoughtfully, absorbing every word as I boxed all the old legal paperwork and locked it away in a storage cabinet to preserve history without dwelling on it daily. We hosted a large family feast at the renovated estate once construction finished, Leela traveling home from her rural outreach stations to join us, the entire backyard heavy with the sweet osmanthus scent grandfather had loved so deeply. Harvest season arrived again a few months later, a full semi-truck loaded with apples and sea buckthorn juice delivered to our foundation facilities, complimentary crates marked for every youth shelter we supported, another brief handwritten note tucked into the delivery paperwork wishing Jude a bright future as an agricultural aid organizer. Jude called Lucas after receiving the shipment to discuss packaging redesigns and online livestream schedules, the two chatting for nearly 40 minutes solely about farming and youth charity, never once touching on the old animosity between our families. After their call ended, Jude told me Lucas possessed sharp business intuition from his years running Voss Group, offering valuable guidance to small rural producers, and I instructed our foundation finance team to prep a full year's advance payment for the orchard's fruit supply to fund new seedling cultivation the following spring, maintaining strictly professional business relations free of personal sentiment. 30 years, to the day after I'd signed those divorce papers inside Lucas's old mansion, Grady and I drove back to the neighborhood where the Voss estate once stood, parking on the curb outside the renovated property. The original cashmere rug and entryway where Lucas had handed me the divorce documents were long gone, the home fully remodeled and sold multiple times over the decades. We stood silent for several minutes on the sidewalk outside the front gate. I was waiting in a car around the corner the day you walked out with that cheap canvas tote bag, Grady recalled, squeezing my hand gently. I swore to myself right then I'd spend every subsequent year shielding you from all that pain. I tilted my head up to look at him, warm gratitude swelling in my chest. Back then, I thought winning the corporate battle would be the end of everything. I never imagined walking out that door would lead to a lifetime of quiet happiness with you. We drove back to our osmanthus-filled country home afterward, Leela, Jude, and their respective partners and young children, filling the backyard for a multi-generational family dinner, children laughing and chasing one another between the blooming trees. A stack of framed photographs covered the outdoor dining table. The day I walked away from Lucas's mansion, our boardroom takeover, beach wedding snapshots, Jude's baby photos, rural charity volunteer trips, 30 years of small, precious milestones side by side. Grady lifted a glass of herbal tea to clink against mine, soft affection shining in his dark eyes. 30 years of storms and quiet joys, side by side by side. I smiled, glancing out over the osmanthus blossoms drifting through the warm autumn air. Off in a remote rural valley, Lucas tended his quiet fruit orchard in solitude, spending his remaining years making quiet amends through community charity. Somewhere in a southern mountain town, Sophie still drifted between low-wage temporary jobs, trapped by her lifelong greed for shortcuts that never existed. I'd broken free from every chain that once bound me to sorrow and vengeance, building a loving family, ethical business, and lifelong mission of compassion beside Grady. There are no true winners or losers in life's long story. Some people spend their remaining days trapped in self-made regret, while others walk away from darkness to chase warmth and kindness. Every scar I carried from those 3 hidden years of plotting had softened with time, blooming into the gentle, peaceful life I'd once only dared to dream of. I would never look back to the old griefs of the past. All my focus rested on the quiet, steady joy stretching forward day after day, surrounded by the people I loved most deeply.